in the far reaches of the Indian Ocean, surrounded by endless waves and jungles so thick that the wind itself seems to breathe, there lies an island, Madagascar. Once it was called Paradise, a land of green valleys, mountains, and spirits older than time itself. But what began as paradise would, in time, be twisted into a theater of fear, and the name of its queen, Ranavalona, would be spoken not with reverence, but trembling. She was called many things: the Mad Queen, the Blood Queen, the Widow of Shadows. Yet before the blood, before the madness, there was simply a woman watching from behind the curtains of another man's throne. The year was 1828. Europe was rising with the age of industry, the noise of progress echoing from London to Paris. But across the sea, Madagascar remained a place where the old god still lived in stone and wind. Its king, Radama I, sought to change that. He was young, curious, and enamored with the strange visitors who came from the West, men who carried books instead of spears, and who spoke of science, faith, and civilization. Radama wanted to modernize his kingdom. He learned English, welcomed Christian missionaries, and opened his capital to trade. Roads were built, schools opened, and foreign advisors dined in his palace. For the first time, Madagascar began to look outward, toward the world. But not everyone looked outward with him. Among the women of the palace, there was one who watched the king's new world with growing resentment. Her name was Ranavalona. She was not his favorite wife, not the one whose laughter filled the halls, nor the one who sat beside him during council. She was quiet, observant, patient, and in her silence, she saw things others did not. She saw the growing presence of the Europeans, their churches, their schools, their strange god that demanded worship in place of the ancestors. She saw the power they held over Radama, the way he listened when they spoke, and she saw the old nobles, the warriors, the priests, restless, whispering, afraid that the traditions of their forefathers were dying. When Radama fell ill and died at the age of 36, the island held its breath. His chosen heir, a young man named Rakatob, was meant to inherit the throne. He was intelligent, mild-tempered, and loyal to the British advisors who had tutored him. For the foreigners, it was a perfect choice, a man who would continue the dream of progress. But progress had already been poisoned. In the darkness of the royal compound, Ranavalona began to move. She spoke in the old tongue to the guards, invoked the names of the ancestors, promised fortune to those who stood with her, and death to those who didn't. Her words were whispers, but they traveled fast. Before dawn, the gates of the palace were sealed. Soldiers loyal to her crept through the sleeping chambers. Those who resisted were cut down in silence. When the sun rose, Rakatob and his family were dead. The blood had barely dried when Ranavalona emerged from her chambers in widow's black. Her eyes were cold, unblinking, as she stood before the bodies of the slain, and with a voice as calm as stone, she declared herself queen. No one dared to challenge her. Those who tried were executed before sunset. The coronation of Ranavalona was not a celebration, it was a warning. The drums that beat across the highlands that day carried no joy. They sounded like war. From that moment, Madagascar changed. The gates that Radama had opened were slammed shut. Missionaries were expelled. Foreigners fled, and the island began to turn inward again, into its old superstitions, its rituals, its ghosts. But the queen's fear ran deeper than faith. She believed that foreign influence was not just a threat to her throne, It was a curse upon her people. To protect her kingdom, she would purify it in blood. The first to die were those accused of betrayal, then those suspected of speaking against her, then those who merely looked uncertain when her name was mentioned. The method of judgment was ancient, the Tangina ordeal, a ritual of poison. The accused were forced to swallow 3 pieces of chicken skin, along with a potion brewed from the nuts of the Tangina tree, a poison so deadly that even a few drops could stop the heart. If the victim vomited all 3 pieces, they were declared innocent. If not, they were guilty. Few survived. Even those who did were often executed anyway, to avoid offending the queen's spirits. By the height of her reign, it is said that nearly 2 million people, half of Madagascar's population, had perished through execution, starvation, or forced labor. But numbers cannot capture what it felt like to live under her rule at night. The capital of Antananarivo fell silent. Torches burned in the courtyards, but no one dared to walk the streets. The queen's spies, the Impanjaka, listened to every whisper. Servants disappeared. Soldiers vanished after dusk. Sometimes entire families were gone by morning, their homes sealed as if they had never existed. And, above it all, the queen watched from her balcony, silent, unreadable, untouchable. Some said she was haunted by spirits. Others believed she had become one. There were stories of her dreams filled with the dead, of her waking at midnight to chant to unseen ancestors, of sacrifices performed in the palace courtyard while the moon hung low and red. Yet to her followers, she was not mad. She was chosen. She called herself the guardian of the ancestors, the protector of Malagasy purity. Her rule, she claimed, was divine. Every drop of blood spilled was an offering to the island itself. And for a time, fear worked. Her enemies were silent. Her throne was secure. The foreigners stayed away. But paranoia is a fire that never dies quietly. Ranavalona began to see betrayal everywhere. In the eyes of her generals, in the murmurs of her servants, in the faces of her own people. She created a network of informants, people who were paid in gold to accuse others. The more names they gave, the greater their reward. Soon, accusation became survival. Villagers denounced neighbors, families turned on one another, and confession became a currency of safety. One night, a man was accused of laughing in the presence of the queen's statue. The next morning, he and his entire household, wife, children, even the servants, were executed. Another time, a soldier was said to have fallen asleep while guarding her palace. His punishment was to be speared alive and left standing, his body turning to stone in the sun. Fear was not the rule of Ranavalona's court. It was its language. Yet amidst this terror, she ruled with uncanny skill. She maintained control of her armies, rebuilt fortresses, and kept foreign powers at bay, even as France and Britain expanded their empires across Africa. Madagascar remained free, uncolonized, because no one dared to challenge her. It was said that one French envoy described her court as a kingdom of ghosts, ruled by a woman without mercy, for 30 years. She ruled like this, alone, untouched, immortal in the eyes of those who served her. But the human soul cannot live on fear forever. Those who survived her purges carried the weight of silence like chains. The children who grew up in her reign learned not to cry, not to hope, not to love. Villages that once sang with the sound of drums and harvest songs now stood quiet, their people staring at the horizon as if waiting for deliverance that never came. Ranavalona aged. but the fire inside her did not fade. Her skin wrinkled, her hair turned white, but her eyes were still sharp, still filled with that same dark certainty that the spirits were watching, judging, demanding sacrifice in the final years of her life. She ordered the construction of a massive wall around her palace, not for protection, but to keep her people out. It is said she walked its length every morning, touching the stones as if they were alive, whispering to them. The wall became her companion, her only friend. Some nights, she would speak aloud to her dead husband, Ranavalona. "They will not take what is ours," she would say. "Not the whites, not the liars, not the ones who forgot the ancestors." The servants pretended not to hear. But when she finally died in 1861, the silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of fear, it was relief. The people did not mourn her. They did not wail in the streets or carve her name into stone. They simply stood still and let the air return to their lungs. For 33 years, they had lived as prisoners in their own land. Now, for the first time, they could breathe. Her death was announced with great ceremony, yet even the priests' voices trembled as they spoke her name. Ranavalona had ruled longer than any monarch in Madagascar's history. She had defeated rebellions, outlived conspiracies, and kept the island free from foreign rule. But she had done it through terror, through pain, through the sacrifice of half her nation. And so history remembers her not as a liberator, nor as a ruler, but as a lesson. That power without mercy becomes poison. That fear, once unleashed, devours even the one who commands it. When travelers visited her tomb years later, they said the place felt heavy, as if the air itself refused to move. Some claimed to hear whispers beneath the stone. Others said the queen's ghost still walked the corridors of her ruined palace, counting the souls she had sent to the ancestors. But perhaps the truest haunting is not her spirit, it is her story. Because Ranavalona's reign is not a legend of madness. It is a mirror, a reflection of what happens when a single human being believes themselves divine, when fear becomes faith, and devotion becomes death. History does not forget such names, it buries them, and in their graves, the earth remembers. Ranavalona, Queen of Madagascar, Mother of Fear, Daughter of Darkness, a woman who tried to save her kingdom, and instead drowned it in blood. When Queen Ranavalona finally died, the people of Madagascar did not cry. They whispered. Her body lay inside the royal compound, draped in crimson silk, guarded by soldiers who had learned never to look directly at her even in death. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. It was said that when they lifted her coffin, the wood creaked as if something inside had sighed, not the sound of a body, but of a soul, unwilling to leave. Priests chanted the ancient words, calling upon the ancestors to accept her spirit. But the fire in their torches flickered strangely, the smoke curling downward instead of up. Even nature hesitated. For 3 decades, Ranavalona had ruled through blood, fear, and silence. And though her heart had stopped, her shadow remained. Her son, Rakoto, known formerly as Radama II, was crowned in 1861, young, handsome, idealistic, everything his mother was not. He had spent years in quiet resistance, waiting for her death. He promised a new era, freedom of religion, open trade with Europe, peace with foreign nations. The world looked upon Madagascar with cautious hope. The nightmares seemed to be ending, but history rarely releases its prisoners so easily. The new king reopened the island's gates, invited missionaries back, and reconnected with the outside world. He abolished the Tangina ordeal and freed thousands of prisoners. He spoke often of his vision, a Madagascar reborn, educated, modern. But in the dark corners of his palace, the old guard, the men who had survived his mother's terror, murmured their warnings. "Be careful," they said. "The Queen's eyes are still watching." Radamatu laughed. "The dead cannot rule the living." He was wrong. The ghost of Ranavalona ruled through memory, through fear, through the unspoken code she had burned into her people's souls. Even after her death, no one trusted anyone. The generals distrusted the ministers. The priests distrusted the missionaries. The servants distrusted each other. The new king's reforms felt like blasphemy to those who had once worshipped the Queen as divine. To embrace foreigners again was to insult the ancestors, and to insult the ancestors was to invite the curse she had left behind. Rumors began to spread. Crops failed. Livestock died. A strange fever swept through the countryside. Some said it was punishment from Ranavalona's spirit for opening the gates she had closed. Others said her ghost walked the hills at night, her veil trailing through the grass, her mouth whispering the names of those who betrayed her. Then, whispers turned to rebellion. It began with one man, Ranavalona, the Prime Minister. He had been one of Ranavalona's most loyal advisors. To him, the Queen's death was not an ending, but an insult. He despised Radama's reforms, saw the king as weak, corrupted by Western ideas. He began gathering supporters in silence. The plan was simple: remove the sun, restore the old ways. One night in May 1863, the palace lights burned late. The young king was celebrating with his advisors, foreigners among them, when a group of soldiers entered quietly. They told the king there was unrest in the city and that he should come with them for safety. He followed them into the courtyard. There, in the shadows, the Prime Minister waited. No one knows exactly what happened next. Some say the king pleaded for mercy. Others say he stood tall and defiant, his last words being, "Tell my people I tried to free them." By dawn, Radama II was dead. His body was never found. Officially, the court claimed he had disappeared, but the people knew. The curse of Ranavalona had claimed her own blood. The throne did not remain empty for long. A new queen was chosen, Rasaharina, Ranavalona's cousin, and the Prime Minister's puppet. The court declared her the rightful successor, and with her came the return of the old rule. The throne would forever share power with the Prime Minister. No monarch would ever rule alone again. It was as if Ranavalona's ghost had designed it herself. Even in death, she controlled the balance. No crown without fear. No power without chains under Ras. The island reopened to foreigners again, but cautiously, like a wounded animal sniffing at the hand that once struck it. Treaties were signed, trade resumed, and churches rebuilt. Yet the land remained uneasy. The people whispered of strange things, of fires that started without cause, of children who claimed to see a woman in black walking through the rice fields at dusk. They called her the White Shadow because her face was pale like moonlight and her eyes never blinked. Wherever she appeared, sickness followed by the time Queen Ranavalona II took the throne in 1868. Even the name Ranavalona had become a curse. Still, she chose to keep it, perhaps out of defiance, perhaps out of fear. She, too, wanted reform. She allowed Christianity to return and even converted herself, but the priests found her palace uneasy, cold. They said prayers didn't echo there, as if the walls swallowed every word in the villages. Mothers told their children that the old queen still listened from beneath the earth, that she counted the living as if waiting to call them home. Years turned to decades, and the curse deepened. Madagascar's politics became a cycle of blood and betrayal. Queens enthroned and dethroned. Prime ministers murdered, treaties broken. The island's isolation ended, not with liberation, but invasion. In 1895, the French came. They had waited for this moment, patient, watching from afar, as the kingdom tore itself apart. Their ships appeared on the horizon like black ghosts. The invasion was swift. The capital fell as the French flag rose over Antananarivo. The people remembered Ranavalona's warnings. The whites will take what is ours. Some wept. Others said the ancestors were punishing them for forgetting her law. But the truth was simpler. Her fear had kept the island frozen while the world moved forward. Her terror, meant to preserve independence, had left her kingdom too weak to defend itself. Madagascar became a colony, the once proud island of kings and spirits, bowed beneath a foreign crown. The palaces that had once echoed with the screams of trials now echoed with French orders. The Tangina pits were filled in. The ancestral shrines were replaced with churches. The people were told they were now part of the French Empire, citizens, not sovereigns. Yet even the colonizers felt something uneasy about the land they had conquered. They wrote letters home describing a sadness that cannot be explained, and a presence that lingered in the royal compound at night. Some soldiers swore they saw movement on the palace walls, a shadow of a woman, veiled, standing where no one should be. They said she looked down upon them with eyes that glowed faintly red, as if the embers of her hatred still burned in time. The French officials forbade their men from sleeping near the old palace. Too many had fallen ill. Too many had gone mad, even decades later. When Madagascar fought for independence again in the 20th century, the story of Ranavalona returned. The revolutionaries spoke her name not with hate, but with awe. She kept us free, they said. She defied the whites for 30 years. Others disagreed. She kept us afraid, they said. And fear is not freedom. But perhaps both were true. Every nation has its ghosts. But Madagascar's ghost had a crown, and her legacy was a paradox. She had saved her island from invasion, but at the cost of its soul. When the French finally left, her name still haunted the language, the songs, the dreams, even now in the highlands where her palace once stood. Locals say that on certain nights, when the wind passes through the hills, you can hear her voice carried through the grass, soft, distant, almost tender. Some claim she whispers in Malagasy, "I did what I must." Others hear something darker, "You are still mine." The historians write of her as a tyrant, a madwoman, a ruler who killed half her people. But history has a habit of simplifying monsters. Perhaps she was mad, or perhaps she was merely a woman who saw the world closing in and chose terror over surrender. Perhaps she loved her land so much that she could only protect it by drowning it in blood. Maybe the madness of Ranavalona was not in her cruelty, but in her loneliness, a queen surrounded by ghosts of her own making. After all, what is a ruler when everyone else is dead? When no laughter remains, when no song dares to rise, when even the air tastes of fear, what remains but silence? That was her kingdom, and though centuries have passed, that silence still lives there, in the ruins of her palace, in the quiet between the drums at dusk, in the eyes of those who remember without speaking. The story of Ranavalona is not only the story of a queen, It is the story of how fear becomes inheritance. Her descendants wore crowns made of her shadow. Her kingdom fell not to enemies, but to her memory. And the island she sought to protect still carries her mark, invisible but eternal. For when terror is born in the name of love, it never dies. It only sleeps, waiting for the next name, the next crown, the next heart that believes power can conquer death. In Madagascar, they say, every queen still hears her voice on the wind. And when thunder rolls across the highlands, the old women whisper, the Blood Queen walks again. The walls she built still stand, cracked, overgrown, but defiant. The silence she left behind still hums beneath the soil. And in that silence, somewhere beneath the dust and ruin, her spirit waits, the queen who loved her land so fiercely that she became its curse. Ranavalona, the mother of fear, the daughter of death, the woman who believed that to save her people, she must become their god. And perhaps, even now, in the long dark of history, she still is.